What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the spot where we kick back and react to all kind of different things. Alright, so what we got going on today? We're back over on Kyle Hill's channel. Like I said, we was going to go through the Half-Life stories because that got requested a couple of times. And the one that we did check out already, the newest one, was pretty interesting. So looks like there's 11 of these, so we're going to take a little journey through them. The first one, this one is called Something is Happening at Chernobyl. I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly, but anyway, I know he's mentioned this before in a few videos we checked out, so we're going to get into this now. Let's go.
35 years ago, the world experienced what was, and still is, the worst nuclear disaster in history. Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had melted down, spewing radiation across Europe and creating hundreds of tons of radioactive lava, 95% of which remains semi-crystallized in dark basements to this day. And that's where most people's knowledge of the catastrophe ends. Well, almost 4 decades after most of the world has forgotten it, something is happening a few meters below Pripyat once again. What is it, and just how concerned should we be that Chernobyl's irradiated heart is still beating? The scope and scale of the disaster that was Chernobyl was something the world had never seen, as was the cleanup. Over 206 days, 90,000 people flooded the dangerous site to clean, catalog, and construct. The first responders were the first victims of fatal radiation doses. After those first bodies failed and robots malfunctioned, Soviet soldiers known as liquidators were brought in. These young men actually considered braving the invisible dangers because the Soviet Union had told them they could either serve 2 years in the concurrent Afghan war or 2 minutes shoveling debris off of their reactor roof.
Wow. That's cold-blooded. Either go deep into this highly radioactive area for 2 minutes for cleanup duties or spend 2 years in a war. Oh man, they signed up for the radiation.
Most of these liquidators are now either sick or dead.
The
initial cleanup at Chernobyl was a monumental and costly effort that ended with the sarcophagus, a hastily made coffin of concrete and steel meant to keep radiation in and everything else out. It wasn't perfect, but it was never meant to be a lasting solution. Because just being in the vicinity of the failed reactor was dangerous in and of itself, nothing was constructed optimally. There were more than 1,000 square meters of cracks in the shelter, and no engineer would ever consider it stable. This was when something much more impressive was designed and eventually implemented: the new safe confinement. Started in October 2007, the new safe confinement, or NSC, would be a modern tomb to rival the ancient pyramids. It was to be built taller than the Statue of Liberty and wider than the Roman Colosseum. This would require more bolts than most US cities had people, and about half the Titanic's weight in steel. It was slid over the sarcophagus in late November 2017, with the promise of containing the ruins underneath for at least the next 100 years. The NSC would allow scientists inside to study the failure, keep radiation and radioactive dust from escaping into the environment any further, and jumpstart the cleanup process with cranes installed on the interior. The space between the ruined reactor and the outside world was even pressurized. In the event of an excursion from the sarcophagus below, a pressure gradient would keep the nuclear material inside, at least for a little while. Of course, there were 30 years between when the sarcophagus was constructed and when the NSC entombed it. During that time, nature wasn't following the suggestions of scientists. No, every time it rained, water would enter the leaky coffin and soak literally hundreds of thousands of kilograms of nuclear fuel and fuel-containing materials. This was a problem because water interacts with nuclear material in a very specific way.
Okay.
In pretty much every nuclear reactor you've ever heard of, water is critical. Inside of a nuclear reactor, it serves 3 functions. The first is to cool down fuel. The second is to get turned into steam by that fuel to turn turbines and generate electricity. And the third, germane to this analysis, is to act as a moderator of nuclear reactions. This last function is at the heart of what's happening at Chernobyl right now. Neutrons flying out from radioactive materials don't just smack into other atoms and instantly cause a chain reaction. It turns out that only certain kinds of neutrons do that, the slow kind. Neutrons come screaming out of unstable nuclei at 45 million miles per hour, way too fast for other atoms to grab onto them and continue on the chain reaction. Neutrons at 1/10,000th of that velocity are much better at that, and you can slow neutrons down this much by making them bump into a bunch of stuff. If you've ever played billiards, you've seen something pretty close to what's called an elastic collision, a perfect transfer of momentum. You may have even seen one ball slow down almost completely after a good smack. Looking at the math makes this easy to understand. If momentum is always conserved, then if both balls are the same mass, as you see here, then the only physical option is for one ball to slow down considerably or even completely. An effective way to slow down neutrons inside of a nuclear reactor, therefore, would be for those neutrons to hit as many similar mass particles in elastic collisions as possible and slow way down. This is exactly why you see water in a reactor. The hydrogen in water has mass just like a neutron. And being a similar mass, hydrogen slows neutrons way down after colliding to the point of much more likely chain reactions and the successful operation of a nuclear reactor. This is the reason why water is a great moderator of nuclear reactions. And all of this brings us back to an inaccessible basement below Chernobyl reactor number 4.
So I'm guessing that means that the rain was just making it that much more dangerous for people to be around?
Along with the cranes, sprinklers, and entry points, the new safe confinement was outfitted with radiation detectors, and they've been blinking above the ruins of reactor number 4 for 35 years. Some spots are more hot than others, but scientists expected this to be the case. The rapidly constructed sarcophagus was leaky, and most of the uranium fuel at Chernobyl was still slumbering. This meant that any seasonal or heavy rain let water in, submerging the fuel in pitch-black basements and moderating neutron emission. This had the effect of reigniting smoldering embers of the worst nuclear disaster in history. Like lightning, neutron spikes in the radiation detectors would come and go with the rain. But this never seemed to worry the scientists of the Institute for Safety Problems of Nuclear Power Plants, the only scientific institution that has been studying the state of the sarcophagus since the accident. And to quote the scientists there, fuel-containing materials were fully wet and dynamics of the neutron flux density was within seasonal trends due to the regular precipitation and condensate input, i.e., there were no potentially hazardous changes of the subcriticality of these nuclear hazardous fissile materials. End quote. And it was this institution, the ISP-NPP, that has now pushed back against the flurry of breathless headlines implying some kind of imminent disaster at Chernobyl. Yes, something is indeed happening. This year, neutrons have been spiking detectors in an inaccessible basement room named 305/2. Yes, there are nuclear reactions pinging beneath Pripyat again. However, these stories are exactly why understanding the nuclear physics first is important. The nuclear scientists watching these spikes in the sarcophagus.
Love that quote. Understand the material first before you go off on what the media is talking about, because that's where the media gets you. They are banking on the fact that most people don't know what they're talking about and they're just going to go with whatever agenda that they're pushing. It's like, no, that's why I feel like when they do these reports, they should have specialists, to actually explain this stuff instead of just, the guy on TV. But you know how it is.
Expected this to happen too. Like the expected spikes as seasonal rains dripped onto slowly deteriorating uranium fuel. You see, the new safe confinement was watertight, which meant that eventually, all that water that had gotten into that cursed place would evaporate. The best hypothesis scientists currently have is that as evaporation in Chernobyl occurs without water to get in the way, neutrons are now moving through the nuclear material differently. The lava-like fuel has cracked and cooled over time and has become porous, full of holes. This change in structure, combined with the receding water and the reflectivity of the surrounding crumbling concrete, is hypothesized to account for the 40% increase in neutron spikes. Those 45 million mile per hour neutrons are shooting out once again. Quoting the representatives of the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl itself, this situation had been predicted by the ISP-NPP before the NSC arch was slid over, and was taking place due to the drying of over-moistened environment of black lava-like FCM. Currently, the sensors tracking the neutron flux density show constant values in all premises with no trends to rise, and the current levels do not pose threat of self-sustained chain reaction of fission." End quote. Of course, this will only put your mind at ease if you believe the predictions of nuclear scientists working at and for the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Despite the headlines, what is happening at Chernobyl is currently cause for caution.
And I get the hesitation of some people considering that Chernobyl already had one meltdown. So they're like, are you guys sure you guys have it under control this time? So I can get how people are like, I don't know. So even though you have, even though you are a professional and everything, you still got to take that into account.
Study, not panic. These are embers of a 35-year-old catastrophe, not a looming second disaster. In fact, according to the physics, nothing like what happened in 1986 is ever likely to happen there again, as remaining water to moderate a meltdown would quickly boil away, and safety protocols like sprinkler systems that spray neutron-absorbing liquids are already in place. But make no mistake here, from monitors sealed underneath an artificial shield taller than the Statue of Liberty, we know that what melted into the earth below the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986, what is beneath a sarcophagus 90 kilometers north of Kiev, is not dead and buried. Until next time.
It is true.
Thank you so much to the very nerdy staff here at the facility for their direct and substantial support in the creation of this here video. Today especially, I'd like to recognize Research Assistant Applejuice and Visiting Scholar Seraph the Angel. If you'd like to join the facility, no, I don't look like a cult.
All right. Well, that was a good one right there. Interesting story, though. So, yeah, like I said, I know that they've done a lot of work to make sure that it doesn't happen again, but, nothing is impossible. So I get why the people in the media would be hesitant to believe them over in the UK about it being completely safe now. Not to mention, just like Kyle said, during the time that they was fixing the disaster, a lot of that soaked into the soil in the surrounding areas. So you still have to take that into account as well. It takes time for it to finally settle and no longer become dangerous. A long time. So let's just hope that they do have it under control and nothing like that ever happens again. All right, well, this is a good one. So y'all know what to do. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what y'all thought about this one. Let me know what you'd like to see me react to next. Hit that like button before you go. Share this video with everyone you know. And subscribe if you haven't done so already. All right, so till next time, take care of yourselves. And I'm out of here.